Hi friends, it's Sarah. I didn't actually expect to be making another video about fatness quite so soon, but this one happens to also be a costume issue. There was something that happened recently in the news. We got pictures of Sarah Paulson from the set of American Crime Story, filming as Linda Tripp, wearing a fat suit. And in this case, fat suit means padded costuming and prosthetics to make an actor who is straight-sized look plus size. Although it might be more accurate to refer to Linda Tripp as mid-size, as she is the size of the average, closer to the average size of an American woman than Sarah Paulson is. So when these videos hit Twitter, there were a number of responses, and how I responded and a number of other people was disappointment and frustration. And I tweeted, fat suits are dehumanizing, hire fat actors. A number of other people tweeted their responses as well. Fat activists talking about how this takes jobs away from fat actors. And it does. And these tweets kind of took off. Like, I'm nobody with 100 and change followers, and I got over, it's over 2,000 likes at this point. And there was a lot of support. Like I said, there were like 2,000 likes. There were some genuinely curious and a bit clueless people. There were some more ignorant than clueless. And of course, there were some haters. And I did, for a time, expand in some replies to explain about the dehumanizing nature of fat suits. But it is kind of exhausting to do that on Twitter, and eventually I had to mute the tweet. So, but I have this platform, and I feel like something of this nature requires more than 2 sentences. Especially since I'm a costume person, and what I do on this channel is talk about costumes. And since I am a fat person, and I guess I've decided to talk about fatness on this channel, I am going to use this to expand on the problem with fat suits. And yes, the TLDR is fat suits are dehumanizing and hire fat actors. But let me take you through that. Before I do, obviously this might be triggering for some folks, and I hope you know if it's going to be too much for you. I acknowledge these conversations can be uncomfortable, and but sometimes uncomfortable is good. Sometimes uncomfortable is healing. So if you're willing to be uncomfortable with me, let's talk about fat suits. And let me say first off that I admire Sarah Paulson. She is a very talented actor and an out lesbian woman in Hollywood, which is not easy. So hats off. I admire her. And I don't think she had any ill intentions in doing this. Nor do I think Ryan Murphy, the producer, had any ill intentions. He has done a lot of work I enjoy, some not as much, but some work that I really enjoy. He's the producer on Pose, which to my mind is one of the best things on television right now. And I believe that both of these people understand how important representation is. They take it very seriously in regards to queer issues, and as a queer person, I appreciate that, and other issues as well. I think what has happened here is fat activism is new, and they may not be aware, they're probably unaware that this could be a problem. We all have areas that we don't see. It is a little like driving in a car, and there are spots that you can't see if you don't turn, just from the position that you're in. If you don't turn, you don't see things, and you can cause an accident. You can hurt people, you can hurt yourself. But if you don't know to turn, then you don't turn. So somebody has to teach you that. And I appreciate the people who have taught me the things that I don't see from my vantage point, from the place that I stand. So I hope that if you, like I'm assuming Paulson and Murphy, don't know that fat suits are a problem, that fat representation is an issue, I hope that you will accept me telling you about this in good faith, and listen as I try to listen if you would tell me about something that I don't see. We've all got to help each other get better. So I'm assuming good intention here, but intention is not the most important thing. Impact is the most important thing. And the impact is fat suits are dehumanizing. They're dehumanizing to fat people, and they're not so good for straight-sized people. They are part of a harmful past and a damaging present. And they take opportunities away from fat actors and from fat people, opportunities to see ourselves represented accurately and to see ourselves worthy of accurate representation. They reinforce harmful anti-fat biases and fat hate. And that's in both in straight-sized people and internalized hate for fat people, which leads to the most damaging issue. They can reinforce eating disorders. And sort of the least important issue here, they're also bad costume design. That's a lot, and I will break it down for you. We're going to go from the outside in, so there will be plenty of preparation for the stuff that could be triggering. There is one point that I will not be arguing or making a case for, and that is that fat people are human beings and worthy of equal respect to every other human being. That is a fact. I will not be arguing it here. I will not be arguing it in the comments. If you believe that some human beings are worth less than other human beings or don't deserve equal respect, I don't really want you on my channel. Yeah, I do not know how to teach you basic empathy. So yes, I assume that humans are humans and worthy of respect, regardless of size, regardless of ability, regardless of skin color, regardless of place of origin, or any other factor. We can discuss how actions impact the level of respect people require, but that is a different discussion. Okay, let's begin with the history. So when I talk about fat suits, generally I'm referring to a costume worn under the clothing with padding and worn sometimes with makeup or prosthetics to make a straight size actor look like they are plus size or larger. And non-fat actors have been padding costumes and playing fat characters since as long as we know the history of theater. In the early days, you would have characters in Shakespeare like Falstaff, and they would often be figures of fun, fat and funny. And that's where it began. It would be sort of clownish characters. Fat suits were sometimes used in blackface minstrel shows, particularly to represent the mammy character who was a dehumanizing stereotype of a black woman who's existed solely to care for white kids and was a grotesque stereotype. The roots of anti-fatness and anti-blackness are deeply intertwined. I am not the best person to speak on that. I will add some references. And I'm not bringing this up to suggest that fat suits are as bad as blackface. Blackface belongs to its own particular place in hell, but nuance is a thing, and these things do come from the same sort of tradition. For a long time in the history of theater, there was a tradition of actors who belonged to the majority dressing as caricatures of marginalized people and portraying dehumanizing stereotypes of other people. And as we moved into the era of film, that tradition came into film. We've all seen Breakfast at Tiffany's or similar kinds of films. We've all seen films that used white actors to play non-white characters or similar caricatures. There was a lot of prejudice stuff in film for a long time, for most of the 20th century. As we moved into the last decade of the 20th century, into the 90s, we started to recognize that this needed to change. And for most things, it did. But at this point, fat suits really became a thing. Hollywood totally went nuts for them. This was the era of Fat Monica on Friends and Fat Bastard on Austin Powers. Fat Monica was presented as the beautiful Courtney Cox, who is a very thin, traditionally beautiful Hollywood actor, was supposed to have been fat when she was a teenager, and this was itself the joke, that she had been fat. And her fatness was treated as pathetic, undesirable, the butt of the joke. And not just in the way that teenagehood is awkward when you look back on it. There was an episode where she was presented, what if she had been fat all along? And again, it's very dehumanizing, infantilizing, and uncomfortable to watch, frankly. And as to Fat Bastard, there is no arguing that this isn't a dehumanizing portrayal of fat people. And there were the Eddie Murphy movies. He's a talented comedian, but I find him very difficult to watch because I just think of Norbert and the Nutty Professor. The entire joke was fat people are disgusting. Norbert includes a lot of humor about how disgusting the idea of a fat woman being sexually active is. This is extremely dehumanizing. And yes, it's comedy. I don't like comedy that relies on dehumanizing people. And I tend to go with the old adage that comedy is laughing at people in power. Laughing at people in pain is bullying. This was the era of that. And it wasn't just fat people who were the butt of the joke in that era of film, that era of comedy. But there was a lot of fat people as the butt of the joke. And there is, of course, famously Shallow Hal, where the joke is that a man has to be hypnotized to find a fat woman attractive. And the woman in question is Gwyneth Paltrow, the typical Hollywood beauty. And the humor is what you would expect. It's so funny that she breaks a chair. It's so funny that her clothes are big. It's so ridiculous that a man would find her attractive. And yeah, this was the sort of trash that was being made with fat suits and that was being presented to the audience. And the thing about portrayals like that, when there are so many of them and they are so pervasive, is they stick in an audience's mind. So even when maybe the intention isn't quite that broad a humor, like say Avengers Endgame, Norbert is in the room. Shallow Hal is in the room. And they framed his body very much as a comedic thing. And it was uncomfortable. As a fat person, I found it very uncomfortable to watch. I know a lot of other people did too, because the audience treated it like a fat suit comedy, because he was in a fat suit. So that is the history of fat suits. And that history is recent, and it comes into the theater with you. If you use fat suits in your film, that history will be there. It has shaped how audiences view fat characters when they're in fat suits. So it has effects. Let's talk about those effects. Well, the most immediate effect is that it takes job opportunities away from fat actors. Now, you may come from the Scarlett Johansson school of casting and believe that an actor should be able to play any role that they audition for and win. And let's ignore for a second that star power has undue influence and often stars don't audition. Let's try and go with the good faith argument, accept this as a good faith argument, and say that the actor who is best should get the part. Okay. Do you believe they're going to cast Keala Settle as Princess Di? How about Christy Metz as Twiggy? How about Melissa McCarthy as Eleanor of Aquitaine? Are any of these likely to happen? No. No. These are incredibly talented actors, but the likelihood is that when they enter casting call, people are not going to consider them for famously straight-sized people, because we do take into consideration how an actor looks when we cast for straight-size characters. So as much as maybe we'd like to live in a world where whoever is the best actor gets the part, especially in film, there is a consideration of getting someone who looks the part. And considering that, let's think about how few parts there are for fat actors. There is more than there used to be, and they are more diverse, thankfully, than they used to be. It's not all funny sidekick or butt of the joke or villain. But there still are not a lot. This is an area where there is a lack of equity. And so when you have actors who have a smaller pool of roles to pick from, when you cast someone not from that group, you are taking opportunities away from those actors. And the women that I mentioned are extraordinarily talented and have had opportunities, so we do know about them. But how many talented people are there who have not been found because the roles are so few? So yeah, it sucks. to take opportunities away from fat actors. So that's fat actors. But what about the audience? What about the fat members of the audience? We lose the opportunity to see ourselves represented authentically, to see our stories told by people who look like us. And I said authentically, because this is the thing about fat suits. They aren't very good. They just don't accurately represent what a fat person looks like, even with the best of intentions. The prosthetics and the padding, even if they're not trying to do a caricature, it usually ends up in a sort of uncanny valley. The face doesn't fit what real fat is like. It tends to sort of exaggerate things rather than just be natural of the way that fat is, the way that it moves. Maybe straight-sized people don't recognize that this is a sort of uncanny valley thing, but to us who see fat every day, we know that that's not an authentic representation of us. So in the early days of theater, all female roles were played by boys in dresses. Can you imagine if that was still the tradition? If all female characters, or almost all female characters, were played by assigned male at birth bodies in drag, would you feel represented by that? And not even good drag, like mostly Monty Python drag. But even if it was good drag, I mean, would you really feel represented by that? Would it feel accurate? And I use drag specifically here, even though drag, to my mind, is not in the same category as fat suits and other representations of inauthentic representations. Because with drag, the inauthenticity is part of the point. It's part of the camp. And it draws attention to the constructedness of gender roles. It's a whole interesting thing. But fat is not a social construction. So when it's inauthentic, it's not drawing attention to an interesting thing about human dynamics. It's just presenting an inauthentic version of people. There are times when that's deliberate, and that often gets into those awful comedy things. But even when it's not deliberate, there's still an inauthenticity there. And so we don't have the opportunity to see ourselves represented authentically. We are relegated to mostly seeing ourselves parodied. And I think most of us understand now that representation matters. But representation isn't representation if it isn't authentic. So that's the representation angle. Like everyone else, we want to be represented authentically, and this isn't it. But representation isn't where it ends. Because there are harms from fat suits. And from this point, we're going to get into some dark areas. Because anti-fatness, anti-fat hate is dark and damaging. Fat suits reinforce some really toxic ideas about fatness. For straight-sized people, there is a comfort in knowing that there isn't actually a fat person on screen, that they don't actually have to engage with or empathize with an actual fat person. They are always aware, especially when the actor is famous, that that person is not actually fat. So they don't have to engage with their biases, and they don't have to engage with a real fat person. because there isn't one there. This reinforces some bad ideas. For one thing, it treats thin bodies as more real. We have a preconceived notion in our society that thinness is equivalent to health, and that health is equivalent to virtue. It's something the Victorians got really into. The people in the Enlightenment started it, but the Victorians got really into it. Yeah, and we haven't really let that go, especially when it comes to stories. Very often, people who are not thin and able-bodied and white, etc., are presented as less real and less virtuous. This reinforces that default because you don't have to engage with an actual fat person. It also reinforces the belief that fatness is temporary because you can take that suit off. I cannot take this body off. And people would like to think that I can and that it's a choice. They do like to tell me to just eat a salad, as if that is how I find the magical zipper that takes this off. But it is not as simple as that. It is true that for some people, fatness is temporary. That there is something that has caused them to gain temporary weight, and their bodies are naturally thin or naturally mid-sized, naturally a smaller size, and when they change some habits or when things improve, their bodies go back to that more natural size for them. There's also people who are able to make changes in a particular way that does result in the weight staying off. Often it's largely often a matter of genetics and luck. Sometimes they did have bad choices. Sometimes there was some mental health stuff or something that was holding them back, and they're able to make the changes and have it work for them because they're lucky. But actually, it's a very low percentage of people who lose weight and keep it off. The vast, vast, vast majority of people will gain it back, and it will come with friends. That is the nature of diet culture. There's a reason it's such a big business. It's repeat business. So when we convince people that it's temporary and that their real bodies are bodies without the fat, we are encouraging some very toxic ideas, some very, very dangerous ideas. And when we use fat suits, it is reinforcing those ideas in people who have no experience of being fat or who are perhaps mid-size, and they see other fat people and they assume that that person is making a choice and that person is lazy and they could just take it off if they just ate right and exercised. Even though the science says that it is not that simple. There are many, many types of weight gain, and there are many bodies for whom losing weight is exceedingly difficult, if not impossible. And also, the assumption, especially when it is because it is straight-sized people wearing the suits, the assumption is that the person, when it is temporary, the fat removed will reveal a thin person, instead of the person literally working their ass off to be less fat, which it can have incredible health benefits to simply get less fat. If you're like me and it does affect your joints and such, I work very hard to try and get less fat. It is difficult, but that is also not your business. But yeah, that's the idea that straight-sized people are absorbing, the idea that that fat person doesn't need to be fat. And it may not be a conscious thought, but it is a thought, and the media that they consume reinforce that. So they go out and are prejudiced against fat people. Don't consider that we might need accommodation. Don't consider that we might need respect. And oftentimes think it is a favor to offer diet advice, tell someone to eat a salad. All sorts of behavior that is, in fact, damaging and unfair. And it can also lead parents of fat children to not treat kids the way that they should be treated. And then there is the effect that absorbing those harmful ideas has on fat people, and the way we see our own bodies. Because we may be taught to see our own bodies as temporary, and to imagine that there is a realer, thinner version of us trying to get out. And maybe you think that's motivating. It can be. But most of the time it's not motivating for good things. A lot of fat people have a history of eating disorders. And there's also people who have body dysmorphia and see themselves as fat when they're not and have eating disorders. And the thing is, society rewards fat people for disordered eating. When I was a teenager, I frequently didn't eat for long stretches of time, or ate as little as I possibly could. And I mean lettuce. There were times I cried in frustration because I couldn't make myself throw up. I tried. I couldn't make it. I used to dream about cutting off my belly or using a vacuum for myself. There is a visible scar on my arm where I cut myself because I took a second bowl of rice. I was 15. Part of the reason that I am as fat as I am today is because doing that sort of thing damaged my metabolism. If I'd been able to accept myself as a small fat person, I would not be what I am today. And none of what I said is unique to me. It's specific, but I know other fat people who had that dream. I know other fat people who have scars like that. And there are a lot of us who the dieting we did damaged our bodies. Everything in the world told me that my fat was something I could change, something that was temporary that I could remove if I just found the right way. And that by not doing so, I was a failure. I was unworthy of love, of care, of dignity. That I was Fat Monica, but I couldn't take my suit off. I couldn't find the zipper. Couldn't find where the prosthesis comes off, because it doesn't. And if I couldn't find that magic zipper, find that magic formula, then I wasn't worthy of being seen. And nothing about that is unique to me. The stories are specific, but there are people watching this who will go, yeah, something like that. I'm not alone. I didn't know that then, but I do now. There is a reason my tweet got like 2,000 likes. And there's a reason why the other fat people who were commenting got masses of likes on their comments, because there are a lot of us who felt this way. I am an adult now. I don't self-harm. I have a complicated relationship with food, but I don't have an eating disorder. But there are people who do. There are people who were where I was when I was a teen, or worse. 9% of the world's population will be affected by an eating disorder. 10,200 deaths each year in the US are the direct result of an eating disorder. That's more than a death an hour, about every 50 minutes. Almost half of 11-year-olds are dieting. I am a very proud auntie. I have 2 nieces, 7 and 6. And they both love to run and play and don't have weight issues. But what if puberty changes that? They're only 4 years away from those kids who are already dieting. Are they going to go through what I went through? The little one looks like me. A little bit. Looks a little like me. Is she gonna look like me when I was 15? Is she gonna feel what I felt? Anti-fatness harms people. Anti-fatness kills people. And anti-fatness is about a lot more than fat suits. But fat suits contribute to it. They do. They contribute to the problem. Those 9-year-old girls who are thinking about dieting, if the fat people they see are people in fat suits, unrealistic caricatures, is that going to help them see fat people better? Imagine a world where they can be a little chubby and it be okay, because it is okay. I am sure that Sarah Paulson had no ill intentions whatsoever, nor Ryan Murphy, nor the costume designer, nor anyone else. I'm not going to assume that they had bright, wonderful, altruistic intentions. I think realistically they intended to tell a story. And they were using the practices and norms of the medium to do that. The problem is those norms need to change. So since I am the costume nerd, and I talk about costume design and storytelling, let me tell you why fat suits are bad costume design. It goes back to what I said about fat suits just not being very good, not very accurate representation. So that even with the best cases, you are in this uncanny valley thing. And especially when the actor is well known, you are not thinking about the character, you're not swept away in the story. You're thinking, at least on some level, about how much has gone into changing this character. How much has gone into the change in the actor. And that is taking you out of the story immersion. of the narrative transport. And sometimes people like that. The Academy certainly seems to have a thing about people changing their appearance noticeably. But most of the time, I don't think it's good storytelling, because what you want in good storytelling is to have that narrative transport, to be swept away. And it's hard to do that when you're not empathizing with an actual character, when you're aware of the falseness. And then this goes back to what I said about it not being drag. With drag, the inauthenticity is the point. One of the elements of queer life has always been a tension between fitting in and being yourself, between authenticity and respectability. And drag kind of laughs at that. Camp laughs at that. So the inauthenticity is the point. But with drama, with stories, inauthenticity is working against the thing. And I personally, I love drag. And drag is one of those few art forms where bigger bodies are celebrated. There are some great queens who are larger. And the inauthenticity there isn't just about laughing at the tension between authenticity and respectability. It's also drawing attention to the constructed nature of gender. So it does this by being the trappings, the dressings, the performance of gender, of one gender, on the body of another. So it's, again, using inauthenticity to draw attention to artificiality. But fat isn't artificial. The saying goes, we're all born naked and the rest is drag. Fat suits aren't drag because fat is part of the naked. So yeah, it doesn't serve the storytelling unless the inauthenticity is part of the storytelling. And in that case, what story are you telling? If you're telling a story about the inauthenticity of fat bodies, what kind of story are you telling? Because that is the story that you're unintentionally telling when you put an actor in a fat suit. You are unintentionally telling a story about fat being inauthentic. And that's not good. And so I would ask you to stop. And again, I am going to assume good intentions for the most part. I'm going to assume that people are not thinking, how will I tell a story about the inauthenticity of fatness? Because that's not how people think. I think this happens when people don't think about fat people, because they ingrained in them is not thinking of us at all, or not thinking of us as equals. And again, I would ask you to stop. As this particular show is likely filmed, and it is probably too late to hire fat actors, which, again, if you want to tell fat stories, you should hire fat actors. A YouTuber whose work I really admire, Jessie Gender, did a video not that long ago when she talked about the need. She was talking about autism inclusion, and she used a phrase, nothing about us without us. Now, as I said, she was talking about autism, and I wouldn't want to appropriate that. That is an important struggle. But I think that at a bare minimum, including the people whose stories you're telling, when you can, is the right thing to do. It's a bare minimum. So just hire fat actors. But in the case of American Crime Story, the casting is done, the filming is probably done, and so it's too late to change things. And many people did ask in that Twitter thread, and you might be asking yourself, well, what do you do if you have cast a straight-sized actor? What do you do if you must use this particular actor? And my answer would be, just don't put them in a fat suit. To basically, if fatness is not part of the story, and to the best of my knowledge, it is not part of this particular story that they were telling, just don't use a fat suit. Treat it like colorblind casting. Now, there are issues with colorblind casting. It's not ideal, but it is better than a lot of other practices. So think of it as size blind casting. And boy, wouldn't it be nice if they actually used size blind casting on more roles. But yeah, if you absolutely must use this thin actor, there is no other option. Just play them as thin. It's not ideal, but it is better than using a fat suit. You are at least presenting an authentic person, even if you aren't presenting an authentic fat person. As much as just using a thin actor still does not leave us represented, invisibility is better than parody. So yeah, that would be my advice. But really, just hire fat actors. They are there. Mid-size actors are looking for work. Small fat, medium fat, there are actors looking for work. And if you hire them, we get to see authentic representations of fatness. You learn to empathize with actual fat people on screen. And the story is better told. You also need a costume designer who knows how to design for fat bodies. That is something that more costume designers need to learn to do. But we only get there when we have more diverse bodies on stage or in film. So yeah, I am assuming that nobody had bad intentions here. And that most people who use fat suits hopefully are only thinking about the story they're wanting to tell. And so I want to ask you to tell a better story, tell a more authentic story. Film can do better. And theater, we can do better too. We can do a lot better. So that's my thoughts on fat suits. We'll see, maybe it'll be a while before I address fatness issues again. We'll see what comes up in the news. So I want to thank my patrons who helped me do this, and I want to thank you for listening.